Hey everybody, this is US immigration lawyer Michael Ashoori. I wanted to record a video to help people that are deciding about which investment-based visa is right for them. Specifically, this is for people that are considering the E2 investor visa versus the EB-5 investor visa, and they're wondering which option is right for them. Again, in this video, I'm going to go over some information and I'm going to specifically have you ask yourselves some questions that hopefully should help clear up which option is right for you. So I think you're going to find this video very helpful. Make sure to stick around till the end. Okay, everybody, so as I mentioned in today's video, we're going to talk about which option is right for you between the E2 visa and the EB-5 visa. Both of these are investment-based visa options, and some of those differences we're going to cover as we go through these different things that you should be asking yourself when you're determining which option is right for you. So with that, let's jump right in. The first thing that you want to ask yourself is, am I even eligible for an E2 visa? Specifically, you want to ask yourself and you want to determine whether your country of citizenship is eligible for an E2 visa. The E2 visa is based on a treaty with the United States. And in order to qualify for an E2 visa, you have to be a citizen of a country that has an E2 treaty with the US. There are a lot of countries that have an E2 treaty with the United States, from Canada to the United Kingdom to many countries throughout Europe and all over the place. There's many countries that qualify. However, there are a lot of notable countries that are not eligible for an E2 visa. So, for example, some of those countries that are not eligible for an E2 visa are Russia, China, Brazil. So, first question you want to ask yourself is, are you even eligible for an E2 visa based on your country of citizenship? If you do not possess citizenship of an E2 treaty country, that should simplify your analysis between E2 and EB-5. It's still possible to get citizenship to an E2 treaty country and then eventually pursue an E2 visa, but recent laws have added certain hurdles to that process. So if you're in the process of getting citizenship to a country that has an E2 treaty with the United States, you may want to discuss that with your immigration attorney to see if the E2 visa may be a viable option for you. That's question number one. That's the first point of analysis. Now, moving on to question number two, you want to ask yourself, how much capital, how much money do I have access to for purposes of my investment-based visa? And the reason why this is so important is because the E2 visa and the EB-5 visa have vastly different investment requirements. And what I mean by that is, specifically, the E2 visa does not have a specific dollar amount that you're required to invest to get your visa approved. The regulations specify that the E2 investment must be considered substantial, and there are various factors that will determine whether your investment is substantial. Now, for purposes of making this easy, in many cases, an investment of $100,000 or sometimes even less than that amount can qualify for an E2 visa. And we have personally had many clients get approved at around that $100,000 investment amount. Now, on the other hand, EB-5 does have a specific minimum investment amount that's required for someone to qualify. And the minimum investment amount is either $800,000 or $1,050,000, depending on the location of the business. If the business is located in an area called a targeted employment area, or TEA for short, then it's eligible for the reduced $800,000 investment amount. However, if the business is not principally doing business within a targeted employment area, then you're required to invest the other minimum, which is $1,050,000. So the reason why this is important is if when you're making your decision or you're considering the differences or what's the more suitable option for you between an E2 visa and an EB-5 visa, and you only have, after considering any sort of gifts that you can receive, any sort of ways that you can get your hands on some investment funds, if you can only get up to that $100,000 amount, then it might be that the E2 option is the more suitable option for you at this time. Again, because the EB-5 visa requires a minimum investment amount of at least $800,000. So that's the second point that you want to ask yourself. Now, let's move to the third factor that you want to consider. Again, at this point, you've already determined that you're eligible for the E2 visa based on your country of citizenship. So again, at this point, you've gone through step number 1 regarding your country of citizenship, and you've gone through step number 2, which is regarding how much funds you have available to you. And if at this point you still find yourself eligible for both options, the third point to consider is timing. Timing is a very important consideration when making immigration decisions. The E2 visa tends to provide you with quicker access to operate your business in the United States versus the EB-5 visa. And the reason why this is because the E2 visa can be applied for directly at a consulate without any need to file anything through USCIS. Now, I should actually specify, with the E2 visa, there's actually 2 ways to apply. If somebody is already lawfully present in the United States in some sort of a valid non-immigrant status, then they can apply for a change of status from whatever status that they're in to E2 status, assuming that they're eligible to do so. And that process is handled through USCIS. However, if the person is outside of the United States or they otherwise want to apply for an E2 visa, then that process is done directly at a consulate. So if somebody's in the US and they want to do a change of status, that process is handled through USCIS. And if the person is either outside of the United States or is inside of the United States but wants to apply for a visa, then they would apply directly with the consulate. Now, a little bit more detail. I know that this can get a little bit confusing, but it all ties to timing, and this is why. If somebody is applying for a change of status to E2 status from within the United States, then they're eligible to speed up the processing of their application through the optional premium processing service. So they can basically pay an additional fee, and based on paying that fee, at least they can get an initial response from USCIS within 15 days. That is very fast. If the person is applying for their E2 visa, as we mentioned earlier, there is no processing time with USCIS. The application is filed directly with the consulate, and depending on how busy the consulate is and how quickly they can review your application and schedule you for a visa interview, that process can also be handled in generally a few months, depending on how busy the consulate is. Now, that's the E2 process. Conversely, the EB-5 process can be much more lengthy because in order to complete the EB-5 process, you have to file a form I-526 with USCIS. And the processing time for the I-526 can be much, much longer than the E2 process. Oftentimes, we can see I-526 applications remain processing for 2 years, oftentimes, and sometimes even more than that. So as you can see, the processing times are vastly different. Now, another important detail that I want to mention regarding the EB-5 program is that recently, EB-5 is now eligible for concurrent filing. What that means is that if somebody is inside of the United States in some sort of a valid non-immigrant status, then they can apply for their adjustment of status, meaning they can convert from whatever sort of non-immigrant status they currently hold in the US to lawful permanent resident status from within the United States by concurrently filing their form I-526 along with their adjustment of status application. Now, in order to do a concurrent filing, like we mentioned, the person has to be lawfully present in the United States in some sort of a valid non-immigrant status, and their priority date needs to be current. Now, there's a whole other discussion about what all that means, but I just wanted to mention that point here. The benefit of a concurrent filing, what it means is that the applicant for the EB-5 can file their form I-526, which is the immigrant petition, and they can concurrently file their form I-485, which is their adjustment of status application. In addition, they can file their form I-131, which is their application for advanced parole, which is essentially a form of travel permission, and they can also file for their application for employment authorization, the I-765. Now, the benefit of this is that, as we mentioned earlier, the form I-526 can take several months to process. Oftentimes, we see these applications processed for 2 years or more. But with the concurrent filing, what ends up happening oftentimes is that the application for advanced parole and the application for employment authorization can come much sooner than that, within oftentimes 6 months, maybe give or take a few months in either direction. So even though the EB-5 application will take a long time to process, oftentimes, for people that are eligible for a concurrent filing, they will see that their advanced parole and their employment authorization will come sooner than that. Now, I know that this section is all about timing, and I know that we mentioned a lot about ways to make the EB-5 processing time sooner, but all that said, generally E2 still remains the faster option between the two. We talked about premium processing. We talked about how with E2 visa applications, they can be applied for directly at the consulate without any need for any sort of underlying USCIS filing. So generally what this means is that E2 is a faster option than EB-5. So now, we've talked about country of citizenship as the first point of consideration. We've talked about your available investment amount for the second consideration. And the third consideration was timing. Now I want to bring us to our fourth and final consideration of today's video, which is what benefit would you ultimately like to receive? And what I mean by that is, would you like to receive a non-immigrant visa or would you like to receive lawful permanent residence, which is a green card? And the reason why this is important is because the E2 visa is a non-immigrant visa, meaning that it's temporary and does not directly lead to a green card. Whereas the EB-5 visa is an immigrant visa, and through successful completion of the entire EB-5 process, you are eligible to become a lawful permanent resident and to get your green card. Now, with that, I do want to mention some important details. The E2 visa is a non-immigrant visa. So as I mentioned, it does not directly lead to a green card, and it's temporary in nature. However, one of the unique benefits of the E2 visa is that it can be renewed indefinitely. If you make an investment and qualify for an E2 visa, assuming that the business that you've made your E2 investment in, you should be able to continue to renew your E2 visa without any limit on the number of times that you can renew the visa. We have seen people on an E2 visa for 15 years or even more than that. That said, E2 will never by itself directly turn into a green card. In order to go from an E2 visa to a green card, you would have to apply for something else, like an EB-5 visa, which is an immigrant visa, as we mentioned. So again, you want to ask yourself, what is the ultimate benefit that you want to receive? Is it a non-immigrant visa or is it a green card? And there's a whole host of questions that you want to go into and ask yourself about that as well. For example, how much time do you plan to stay in the United States? You might want to consult with an accountant to consider the tax implications of each of these options. And there's a whole host of factors basically that goes into whether you want to come to the United States on a non-immigrant visa or whether you want to ultimately obtain your green card. Now, if at the current time, either your timing is more important to get to the United States sooner, or you don't have the funds necessary for EB-5 quite yet, you can start off with an E2 visa and you can remain in the United States as we discussed on your E2 visa, and as needed, you can continue to renew your E2 visa to be in the United States, to operate your business, and so on and so forth. And if at some future point you decided that you wanted to get your green card, at that time, you could consider EB-5, you could consider a host of other options as well to obtain your green card. But you could start off with that E2. Again, maybe you don't have the funds necessary for EB-5 at this time, or maybe it's more important for you to come to the United States and to operate your business sooner rather than later, in which case an E2 visa may be the more appropriate option for you at this time. Again, you come to the United States, let's say you're operating your business, and years later or years down the line, you decide, you know what, I do want my green card. At that time, you could consider EB-5 or a host of other green card options that may or may not be available based on your personal circumstances. Now, if you're on an E2 visa and you decide you want to convert to an EB-5 visa, there are ways for you to use the business that you originally invested in for your E2 visa to be the same business that you use for an EB-5 visa. And in some circumstances, you can count the amount of your investment into your E2 company as part of your overall EB-5 investment amount. What this means is, let's say to get your E2 visa, you originally invested $100,000. And let's say for purposes of this example, in order to qualify for an EB-5 visa, you needed to invest at least $800,000. Well, the $100,000 that you've already invested to get your E2 visa, in some circumstances, can count towards that overall $800,000 amount that you have to hit, meaning that at this time, you would only need to invest an additional $700,000 to meet the required $800,000 minimum investment amount. So there are certain benefits for somebody that's on an E2 visa and wants to convert to an EB-5 visa using their same business. Again, there are so many details to this, and it's very important to consult with a competent immigration attorney, but I just wanted to give this initial information that you may find useful. I hope you found this video helpful. If you're not yet a subscriber to our YouTube channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button so that you can be in the loop with all the videos that we're posting. If you like this video, please hit that thumbs up button so that YouTube knows to share this video with more people. As always, thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next video.